When the last embers of Rome were fading in the north, a quieter light began to glow in the heart of Africa. The wide Sahel, that long, shimmering band between desert and forest, stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Horn of Africa of the east. It was neither sand nor savanna, but something in between. A living frontier where caravans met farmers, where nomads met kings, and where ideas drifted like wind-blown seeds. In the early centuries after 500 AD, trade was the pulse of the world. Long trains of camels crossed the Sahara, their hooves pressing ancient paths into the dunes. They carried bars of salt, woven cloth, glass beads, and small treasures from the Mediterranean coast, and they returned with the yellow dust of gold, ivory tusks, and the stories of distant forests where drums echoed beneath green canopies. The desert, for all its silence, was alive with movement. From this rhythm of exchange rose the first great power of the Western Sudan, the Kingdom of Ghana, though it was not the Ghana of today, but an empire farther north, near the upper Niger. Its people were the Soninke, skilled traders and patient rulers who understood the wealth flowed like a river, steady, invisible, unstoppable. They built their capital at Kumbi Saleh, a twin city where one half belonged to the king and the other to Muslim merchants from the north. The air smelled of dust and spices, and the sound of foreign tongues mixed with the chanting of prayers. Arab traders who reached Ghana could hardly believe what they saw. Al-Bakri, writing in the 11th century, described a court where the king sat surrounded by gold, where even his dogs wore golden collars, and where justice was given with a solemn ceremony. The king himself was a distant figure, almost sacred, approached barefoot beneath a canopy of silk, as musicians played soft rhythms on drums and flutes. But Ghana's power rested not only on gold. It was built on balance, between north and south, between Islam and the older faiths, between desert traders and the farmers of the river valleys. Salt from the Sahara was as precious as metal, and the exchange between salt and gold formed the spine of Ghana's prosperity. For centuries the kingdom guarded its trade routes and grew rich from the tolls of caravans. When night fell over the Sahel, fires glowed from camp to camp, and the whisper of merchants told the news of a continent. Still, no empire lasts forever. The winds of the desert shift, rivers change their course, people move in search of new pastures. By the late 11th century, Ghana began to falter. Droughts thinned its herds, and rival tribes tested its borders. From the north came Berber warriors, the Almoravids, fervent in their new faith, and eager to control the trade that made Ghana so rich. Whether through war or gradual decline, the old kingdom faded into the sands, leaving behind the memory of glittering courts and patient kings. Yet, as the stars turned above the desert, a new dawn rose farther to the south. The old roads of trade were still alive, and new hands were ready to grasp them. The torch of gold passed to another people, and another empire began to form, one whose fame would echo far beyond Africa, even to the markets of Venice and the palaces of Cairo. In the valleys of the upper Niger, a quiet revolution was taking place. Villages that had once sent tribute to Ghana now banded together under local leaders. The sound of drums and prayers mingled with the murmur of scribes writing Arabic letters on smooth wooden boards. In these lands Mali was awakening, the empire that would turn Africa into a legend of wealth and learning. As dusk fell over the Sahel, the air cooled and the camels knelt for rest. Merchants unpacked their bundles of salt and cloth. Women tended small fires, and the horizon blazed with the last red of sunset. Somewhere beyond those sands, a new king dreamed of uniting the valleys under one banner. He could not know that his descendants would one day rule an empire that would make the world gasp in wonder. And so, as the 10th century dawned, the drums of Ghana grew silent, but the heartbeat of Africa did not. It merely changed rhythm, slower, deeper, older, like the pulse of the earth itself. In the shadow of Ghana's fading glory, the land did not fall silent. Across the river valleys and rolling savannas of the upper Niger, new voices rose, soft at first, then steady, then proud. From the ashes of one empire, another was born. It would shine brighter than any that came before, and its light would reach far beyond the deserts, touching the imagination of the entire medieval world. This was the Empire of Mali. The story begins with a man named Sundiata Keita, known to his people as the Lion King. His legend lives on in song, not the fantasy of modern tales, but in the ancient rhythm of the griots, the storytellers who carried memory from generation to generation. Sundiata was said to have been born crippled, unable to walk as a child. But when his enemies mocked him, he pulled himself to his feet, uprooted a tree with his bare hands, and never stumbled again. He united his people, defeated the sorcerer king Sumanguru, and laid the foundations of Mali around the year 1235. Under his rule, and under those who followed, Mali grew vast, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean deep into the heart of the continent. The fertile lands between the Niger River and the Senegal became its lifeline. Grain grew tall, gold dust glittered in riverbeds, and the hum of trade never ceased. The empire was divided into provinces ruled by trusted governors, and its justice was famed for fairness and calm. In the markets of Niani, the imperial capital, people came from every corner of Africa. They traded ivory from the forests, copper from the east, horses from the north, and woven cloth from distant lands. Caravans stretched across the horizon, hundreds of camels, each carrying sacks of salt or gold, guided by men who knew the constellations of the desert sky. The world outside began to take notice. Arab writers, merchants, and travelers carried tales of a king whose wealth seemed endless. That king was Mansa Musa. He ruled Mali in the early 1300s and became one of the most legendary figures of the entire Middle Ages. Even today, centuries later, he is remembered as perhaps the richest man who ever lived. In the year 1324, Mansa Musa set out on his pilgrimage to Mecca, the journey every devout Muslim must take once in a lifetime. But his pilgrimage became more than a journey. It was a procession of wonder. He brought with him tens of thousands of attendants, soldiers and servants. Hundreds of camels carried gold dust, each animal burdened with glittering bags of treasure. When he reached Cairo, the city trembled under the shock of his generosity. Gold became so abundant that its price fell, and it took years for the markets to recover. But Musa was not a mere collector of wealth. He was a builder of worlds. He returned to Mali determined to make his empire not only rich, but wise. He invited scholars and architects from across North Africa and the Middle East. He built mosques of baked earth, their towers rising like candles from the red soil. He filled them with scholars who copied manuscripts and taught geometry, astronomy, and law. And above all, he turned one city into the beating heart of learning in West Africa, Timbuktu. By the mid-1300s, Timbuktu was a city of quiet brilliance. It stood near the great bend of the Niger River, where caravans from the Sahara met traders from the forests. Its streets were lined with adobe houses that glowed gold in the sun, and its markets rang with the sound of languages from across the world. Arab merchants, Berber scholars, Mande traders, and Tuareg nomads all passed through its gates. In the cool courtyards of its schools, students read by lamplight, reciting verses from the Quran and studying the works of Aristotle and Ptolemy. Knowledge here was not guarded. It was shared, multiplied, and passed onward, like water from one vessel to another. The libraries of Timbuktu, small and dusty though they seemed, contained hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, covering philosophy, medicine, mathematics, and history. Some were so old that their ink had faded to a whisper, but their words still carried power. To the north, European kingdoms were still rebuilding after centuries of chaos. To the east, Mongol empires were collapsing into memory. But in Mali, learning and prosperity coexisted, proof that civilization can bloom anywhere the human mind is free to dream. Travelers spoke of justice without cruelty, of markets without theft, of rulers who rewarded honesty. The empire's wealth did not come from greed, but from balance, between trade and faith, between tradition and change. Caravans moved safely across vast distances because people trusted the name of Mali. Its flag, simple and unseen by us now, was once known from the Atlantic coast to the Red Sea. As centuries passed, however, even Mali began to dim. After Mansa Musa's death, rival heirs fought for power. The edges of the empire frayed, and new rulers arose in the east. The Songhai, once Mali's vassals, now ambitious in their own right. The river that had carried the empire's wealth also carried its rivals. By the late 1400s, the golden age of Mali had become a legend. But legends have long lives. Even when its palaces crumbled and its rulers were forgotten, the story of Mansa Musa lived on, a reminder that Africa was not a silent continent waiting to be discovered, but a land of builders, dreamers, and thinkers. And when the wind blew across the dunes, traders still spoke of a time when gold shone like sunlight and knowledge flowed like water. So, as the desert cooled under the stars and the last caravan fires flickered out, the griots sang once more. The lion sleeps, but his shadow remains. The empire may fade, but the song never dies. The Sahel slept. The camels dreamed of their endless journeys, and in the dark courtyards of Timbuktu, a scholar bent over a manuscript, tracing the words of wisdom beneath the trembling flame of an oil lamp. He did not know it, but the knowledge he preserved that night would one day cross oceans and centuries, the quiet echo of a world that refused to be forgotten. While Mali's scholars wrote by lantern light beside the Niger, far to the east another world was stirring. A world shaped not by deserts but by the sea. There, the Indian Ocean shimmered like liquid glass, its waves carrying traders and sailors from faraway lands, from Arabia, Persia, and even India itself. They came with silk and spices, beads of glass and porcelain, and they returned with gold, ivory, and the sweet scent of African wood. This was the Swahili coast. 1,000 miles of coral islands, mangrove shores, and bustling port towns that stretched from Somalia down to Mozambique. Its people were Africans, but their horizons were open to the world. They spoke Swahili, a language born from Bantu roots, woven with words of Arabic and Persian, a living reflection of the trade winds that carried voices from every shore. The coast was alive with sound, the creak of ships setting sail with a dawn breeze, the cry of fishermen, the hum of markets where traders weighed pearls and gold dust by hand. At low tide, children played on sandbars where crabs scuttled through pools of light, and at high tide, ships from distant lands appeared on the horizon like ghosts from another age. By the 9th century, a chain of wealthy city-states had formed along the coast. Names like Kilwa, Mombasa, Malindi, and Zanzibar would echo across centuries. Each city was independent, ruled by the local sultan or council of elders, yet all were connected by the rhythm of the monsoon. For half the year the winds blew from the northeast, bringing ships from Arabia and India. Then, as the seasons turned, the winds reversed, carrying them home again, heavy with African goods. It was a perfect rhythm, nature's own clock, linking civilizations across the sea. Kilwa, in present-day Tanzania, was among the greatest of these cities. Its rulers controlled trade as far south as Sofala, near the mouth of the Zambezi River, where gold from the interior, from the mysterious lands of Great Zimbabwe, was gathered. The city itself gleamed under the sun, houses built from coral stone, decorated with carved wooden doors and lattice windows that let the ocean air drift through. Its mosque, one of the oldest in sub-Saharan Africa, rose above the shore, its walls whitewashed with lime, glowing faintly under the moonlight. When the Moroccan traveler Ibn Battuta visited the region in the 14th century, he was astonished by its refinement. He described the people as generous, well-dressed, and deeply devout, their mosques beautifully built, their homes adorned with imported fabrics and fine dishes from China. This was no forgotten corner of the world, but a thriving link in the vast chain of global trade that stretched from Africa to Asia. Life along the Swahili coast moved to a rhythm both simple and profound. In the morning, fishermen pushed their boats through the surf while traders prepared their ships for distant voyages. In the heat of the afternoon, the call to prayer drifted across the city, mingling with the cry of gulls. And at night, families gathered under palm-thatched roofs, as storytellers recited old legends, tales of spirits, sailors, and lost cities beneath the waves. The Swahili people were masters of adaptation. They blended African, Arab, and Persian traditions into something entirely their own. Their art showed delicate geometric patterns, their poetry carried the sound of ocean waves, their architecture breathed with coral and breeze, and while Islam gave them a spiritual bond with the wider world, their roots remained African, in language, in blood, in the rhythm of drums that still beat behind the hum of trade. Inland, the trade routes stretched deep into the continent. Caravans of ivory and gold wound their way from the interior kingdoms. From the lands of the Shona and the Zambezi to the coastal ports, the world of the forest met the world of the ocean. Each tusk of ivory, each nugget of gold, each carved ebony figure carried a story of rivers crossed, mountains climbed, and generations of traders who knew the land like a poem. To the far south, in the highlands beyond the Zambezi, stood one of Africa's quiet marvels, Great Zimbabwe. Built between the 11th and the 15th centuries, it rose from the granite hills like a dream of stone. Its circular walls, built without mortar, fit so perfectly that a knife blade could not slip between them. Inside, its towers and enclosures formed a labyrinth of mystery. A city built by kings who ruled over a land rich in cattle, gold, and power. Great Zimbabwe was not coastal, yet it was linked to the sea through trade. Its gold and ivory reached Kilwa and beyond, and in return came cloth, beads, and porcelain from across the ocean. The people of Zimbabwe lived in harmony with the land, herding, farming, and crafting, their lives moving with the rhythm of the seasons. When dawn touched the stone walls, the air shimmered with heat, and the world felt both eternal and fragile. But just as other empires before it, Great Zimbabwe eventually declined. Trade shifted, populations moved, and new powers rose farther north. Yet its ruins remained, silent and proud, a reminder that Africa's story was never one of isolation. It was a story of connection, of rivers, winds, and roads that bound the continent to the world. By the late 1400s, change was in the air again. Ships unlike any seen before appeared on the horizon, large, heavy, and built for the open ocean. They flew the crosses of Europe, and their arrival would alter the balance of centuries. The Portuguese came not as traders alone, but as conquerors, seeking to control the gold of Sofala and the spices of the East. They took some cities by force, others by treaty. Kilwa, Mombasa, and others were scarred by their cannons, their old prosperity trembling under new powers. Yet, even as the winds of empire began to shift, the spirit of the Swahili coast endured. Its language survived. Its cities, though changed, continued to hum with life. And the dhows, the small curved boats with their white triangular sails, still glide across the water today, just as they did 1,000 years ago. When the night falls over the Indian Ocean, you can still imagine the sound of sails flapping softly in the wind, and the smell of salt and clove drifting over the harbor. The world turns, empires rise and fall, but the sea remembers. And somewhere in the rhythm of the tide, you can still hear the heartbeat of the Swahili coast, calm, eternal, and endlessly alive. Long before the caravans of Mali or the ships of the Swahili coast, North Africa had already known the weight of empires. Here the Mediterranean touched the desert, and civilizations met face to face. The heirs of Rome and Carthage to the north, and the vast nomadic worlds of the Sahara to the south. Between them ran an ancient rhythm, war and trade, silence and prayer, empire and sand. When the Western Roman Empire crumbled in the 5th century, its African provinces stood like lonely pillars among the ruins. Cities such as Carthage, Leptis Magna, and Hippo Regius still glimmered with marble and mosaics, but their walls echoed with uncertainty. Germanic tribes known as the Vandals crossed from Europe and claimed these lands as their own, sailing along the coast with painted sails, bringing a new rule, brief, fierce, and brittle. For 100 years they held North Africa, until a new power came from across the sea, the Byzantine Empire, determined to restore what Rome had lost. The Byzantines rebuilt fortresses, raised crosses over churches, and named governors in Constantinople's name. But the old order could not last. A greater tide was rising from the east, the tide of Islam. In the 7th century, armies carrying the banner of the Prophet Muhammad swept across Egypt and Libya. The desert tribes joined them willingly, drawn by faith and by freedom from old imperial taxes. City after city opened its gates: Alexandria, Tripoli, Kairouan. Within a single lifetime, the call to prayer echoed from the Nile to the Atlantic. The conquerors brought with them not only the Quran, but also a new vision of order, one that joined the spiritual and the worldly under a single law. In Egypt, the great river remained the heart of life. The city of Fustat, later Cairo, blossomed under the Fatimid caliphs, who ruled in the 10th century with brilliance and learning. They built the mosque Al-Azhar, whose lamps have never gone out. Even today, 1,000 years later, its scholars still debate the words of faith and reason. The Nile carried grain northward and knowledge southward, making Egypt both breadbasket and beacon. To the west, in Ifriqiya, modern Tunisia and Algeria, new dynasties rose and fell like the desert wind. The Aghlabids, the Zirids, the Almoravids, and later the Almohads each carried the flame of reform and conquest. The Almoravids were born among the Berbers of the Western Sahara. Their warriors, wrapped in blue veils, rode out of the dunes with faith in their hearts and discipline in their ranks. They carried Islam south into the Sahel and north into Spain, where their fortresses would one day look out across the Strait of Gibraltar. The Almohads followed them, philosophers as much as soldiers, preaching unity and reason. Under their rule, the cities of Fez, Marrakesh, and Tlemcen bloomed like oases of stone and song. Fez became the jewel of the Maghreb. Its narrow lanes wound between whitewashed walls, fountains murmured in shaded courtyards. At its heart stood the University of Al-Qarawiyyin, founded in the 9th century by a woman named Fatima al-Fihri, a house of wisdom where students from across the Islamic world came to study law, mathematics, astronomy, and the art of calligraphy. The muezzin's voice, the man who calls Muslims to prayer from the minaret, drifted over the rooftops at dawn, and the scent of tanned leather and crushed mint filled the streets. Knowledge was not hoarded here. It was a river that flowed through generations. In Marrakesh, red walls glowed under the evening sun. The great Koutoubia Mosque rose above the city, its tower guiding travelers like a desert star. Markets rang with the sound of hammered copper and the laughter of storytellers who spun tales of heroes, saints, and jinn. To walk its valleys was to wander between centuries, Roman fragments underfoot, Arabic script above, Berber songs in the air. Across the sea, Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain, glittered as a mirror of North Africa's culture. Scholars and poets crossed freely between Cordoba and Fez, between Granada and Tlemcen. Together they preserved the works of the ancients and added their own, inventions in medicine, optics, philosophy, and music. While much of Europe struggled through feudal wars, North Africa and Al-Andalus shared a golden calm, a world where ink was as mighty as the sword. Yet, most of North Africa was not a city, but desert, a living, shifting empire of its own. The Berbers, children of the sands, were its true masters. They knew the secret wells and the stars that pointed home. Their camels carried salt to the south and gold to the north, binding Mali and Morocco in a single thread of trade. At night they lit small fires that burned blue in the wind and told stories older than history, stories of spirits hidden beneath the dunes, of lost caravans guided home by the moon. To outsiders the Sahara seemed empty, but to those who crossed it, it was alive, vast, patient, and full of whispers. The desert was not a wall but a bridge. Through it passed not only goods but also ideas, faith, architecture, mathematics, and music. When the griots of the Sahel sang of kings and empires, the rhythm of their drums echoed the hoofbeats of Berber traders who had once ridden through the same sands. By the 15th century, North Africa stood at another threshold. To the south, Mali and Songhai still held their riches. To the east, Cairo glittered under the Mamluks. To the west, the Maghreb's dynasties watched the horizon. And on that horizon, strange sails began to appear, heavy European ships armed with cannon and compass, searching for new routes to India. The old caravan roads began to fade as trade shifted to the sea. But the memory of those 1,000 years, of scholars, saints, merchants, and wanderers, remained woven into the fabric of the land. When the desert wind rises today over Fez or Marrakesh, it carries dust from every century, grains from Roman Africa, from the tents of the Almoravids, from the classrooms of Al-Azhar. It hums through the date palms, whispers through the ruins, and fades into the dunes. And if you listen closely, under the hiss of sand and the far call to prayer, you can still hear it, the sound of a continent dreaming, a world of faith and learning that bridge the desert and the sea. While gold caravans shimmered across the Sahel and ships glided along the Swahili coast, the heart of Africa lived by different rhythms, slower, quieter, but no less profound. Here the land was immense and alive. Rolling plains where elephants wandered like ancient gods, dense forests whispering in 1,000 shades of green, and rivers so wide that their surfaces seemed like mirrors for the sky. This was Central and Southern Africa, during the long medieval centuries, a world of kingdoms and kinship, of rain and fire, of stories that were never written but remembered in song. No marble ruins remain here, no scrolls of scholars, but the traces are written in the soil, in the patterns of trade, and in the living memory of its people. 3 great rivers define this world: the Congo, the Zambezi, and the Limpopo. They were highways before roads, connecting forests, savannas, and distant coasts. Along their banks, villages thrived, small at first, then growing into centers of power. Canoes carved from single trees glided through misty waters, their oarsmen chanting softly to keep time. Smoke from cooking fires curled above the trees, and drums carried messages farther than any written letter. In these regions, wealth did not come from gold alone but from people, cattle, iron, and the fertile land. The art of ironworking, already ancient, was the pulse of civilization. Blacksmiths were revered, half craftsmen, half magicians, because their forges tamed fire and stone. A single iron hoe could feed a family, a spear could defend a kingdom. Wherever the sound of hammer on anvil rang through the forest, it meant power was being shaped. Far to the west, near the Atlantic coast, rose one of the greatest realms of the interior, the Kingdom of Congo. By the late 1300s, it stretched across what is now Angola and the Democratic Republic of Congo, a network of provinces bound by tribute and trade. At its heart stood the capital, Mbanza Congo, a city built on a plateau surrounded by fertile valleys. Its rulers, known as the Manikongo, governed with ceremony and order, presiding over councils of nobles and priests. Here the king's word carried spiritual weight, for he was seen not only as a ruler, but as the guardian between the living and the ancestors. Trade bound Congo to the wider world. From the coast, caravans carried salt and fish inland. From the interior came ivory, copper, and cloth made from raffia palm. The rhythm of drums echoed through the hills, summoning people to market. Even before Europeans arrived, Congo was already part of an older, subtler globalization, its goods and stories traveling through countless hands before reaching distant shores. Life in Congo was ordered but human. Villages were built around open courtyards where elders met beneath trees to settle disputes and share wisdom. Music filled the nights, flutes, rattles, drums, and voices rising under the stars. The people of Congo believed that the world of the living was only one layer of existence. Above it lay the realm of spirits, and below it the place of the ancestors. To live well was to walk carefully between all three. To the southeast, in the highlands of today's Zimbabwe, the Shona people built a civilization whose ruins still awe travelers. Great Zimbabwe. Its story overlaps with the Swahili coast, but deserves its own moment. Between 1100 and 1500, it flourished as the heart of a vast trading network stretching to the Indian Ocean. Its stone walls, perfectly fitted without mortar, formed enclosures so massive that their curves seemed to follow the shape of the earth itself. At the center stood the great enclosure, with its towering conical tower, its purpose still a mystery, perhaps a symbol of power, perhaps a sanctuary of the ancestors. The people of Zimbabwe were herders, farmers, and traders. Cattle were their wealth, grain their strength, and gold their bridge to the outside world. Caravans carried their riches to Sofala, where merchants from Kilwa and Arabia waited. In return came fine cloth, beads, and porcelain, objects that found their way into royal homes deep in the African interior. From the granite hills, the view stretched endless, plains shimmering in the heat, herds moving like clouds, the sound of bells carried on the wind. The kings ruled with dignity, and when they died, they were buried in secret, their tombs hidden so their spirits could watch over the land unseen. Even now, when the wind whistles through the ruins, locals say it carries the voices of the ancient rulers. Not angry, not sorrowful, but proud. Deeper in Central Africa, far from trade routes and empires, life followed a gentler rhythm. Small kingdoms rose among the forests. Luba, Lunda, Losi, Chokwe, and many more. Their boundaries shifted with generations, but their traditions endured. The ruler, often chosen from royal lineages, ruled not by fear but by consensus, advised by councils of elders and chiefs. Stories were law, songs were memory. The people told tales of origin, of spirits who emerged from rivers, of ancestors who taught them to work iron, of animals who once spoke to humans. These societies valued harmony more than conquest. When conflict came, it was resolved through gifts and diplomacy. A good king was not one who took many lives, but one who could stop a war with words. The forest itself seemed to enforce that peace, its vastness humbling all who entered. Even the mightiest warrior could be lost within a day if he strayed from the path. In this world, courage meant patience, and power meant balance. By the 1400s, Africa as a whole stood at a crossroads. The Mali Empire was fading, Songhai rising. The Swahili ports still glittered, though new sails from Portugal now prowled the seas. In the north, the Maghreb dynasties still ruled, and Egypt remained the link between continents. In the forests and plains of Central and Southern Africa, life continued as it had for centuries, measured not by empires but by seasons and stories. But change was coming, silent at first, Foreign ships would soon anchor along the western coasts, bringing new trade and new troubles. The world that had been connected by desert routes and river paths would shift toward the ocean, and the age of exploration would begin. Yet, the Africa of 500 to 1500 had already written its own masterpiece, in stone, in memory, and in music. It was a continent not waiting for discovery, but already awake, already vast, already dreaming. As night falls over the forests and plains, you can still hear its echoes. The faint ring of a blacksmith's hammer, the distant roll of drums, and the whisper of rivers carrying starlight toward the sea. The Middle Ages had ended, but the heartbeat of Africa would go on forever.